In February of 2000, Capcom survival horror franchise jumped into the next generation of gaming with the release of Resident Evil Code Veronica, an unnumbered mainline entry in the series, and serves as a direct sequel to Resident Evil 2. A mainline game that brought the franchise into full 3D and brought back the two characters' stories, making this entry feel like the true Resident Evil 3. Set 3 months after the destruction of Raccoon City, in Code Veronica, you once again get the chance to play as Claire Redfield, who's been sent to a remote island after being captured in an umbrella facility in Paris, looking for her brother Chris. And not long after she arrived, another outbreak occurs, with the dead once again rising from their grave. But of course, you won't be alone in this terrifying journey. You'll also get to play as Steve Burnside, a fellow prisoner that's been sent to the island along with his father, with an overly dramatic story and Claire's way too young looking love interest. And you'll also get to take control of the returning Chris Redfield, with his own side of the story. Code Veronica is a very ambitious title, with a story that unravels in multiple locations. First, you'll be exploring an island with a prison, 2 small mansions, and other locations set in between. Then the next, you'll now be exploring Antarctica, and you'll even get to return to the island and explore its many secrets. Code Veronica's world is so big that the number of times that you'll be backtracking in it will make the streets of Raccoon City from Resident Evil 3 seem like a linear hallway. And even during my second playthrough, I was still having a hard time knowing where to go. This is the first traditional 3D Resident Evil game, not including the spin-off Survivor. So with this improvement comes a new change in the form of the camera. It now pans to follow the player's movement to make it more cinematic. It doesn't pan as gracefully as Silent Hills, but it does the job. And each of the areas that you visit looks unique to each other. The character models also look beautiful, most notably Claire. Code Veronica is released only a few days after Survivor, and seeing the massive jump in graphics is just impressive. I know it's released on a more powerful and different platform, but this is truly undeniably beautiful. The only real issue I have with the graphics is how dark everything looks. Because of this, I've had a difficult time traversing many areas. I even got stuck for some time because I had no idea where to go, since the locations was so dark and foggy. The door that I was supposed to go to was barely visible, and I only managed to find it by spamming the button. And the voice actors for the new characters are simply ridiculous.
Consider the area you are in a special playground I have prepared just for you.
Everyone sounds whiny and high-pitched, it almost hurts my ear. Though at least they've got more emotions than the entire cast of Survivor. While its graphics may have been a clear step up from its predecessor, the gore on the other hand has been severely toned down. Enemies' heads no longer explode when you shoot at it, making the combat a bit unsatisfying, especially when compared to its predecessor. And the character's mutation transformation is not as bloody as its pixelated counterpart, though the game did manage to surprise me by killing one of its main characters, something that the Resident Evil franchise never really does at that time. Most of the characters who've died in the past are just side characters that had no major impact to the plot. Some of the improvements that were introduced in Resident Evil 3, like being able to climb stairs without pressing a button, or being able to dodge, are completely absent in this one. Instead, we are now back with the more simpler controls. This means the gameplay is now a lot slower paced compared to Nemesis. Code Veronica is a clear throwback to the original game, by bringing back old features that were missing from its sequels, such as the 3D item inspection and the 2 character campaigns from Resident Evil 2, which lets you play as Chris to complete the whole story. Hell, it even lets you explore a mansion that's almost an exact copy of the Spencer mansion. However, controlling Claire doesn't feel as weighty as in the other games, and because of this, it kind of removes the groundedness of the controls. It's a lot easier to bump into walls now, and spinning her looks very awkward and doesn't have any animations. There's a lot of arsenal to use in Code Veronica, from the handy pistol to the new dual-wielding weapons, which allows you to aim at 2 enemies at once. And some of the weapons from older titles also makes a return, such as the shotgun and the crossbow handgun, which is just as underwhelming as it was before in Resident Evil 2. None of the enemies react to any of its attacks, and the sound that it makes feels very underpowered. As for the enemies, there's the essential zombies, Cerberus, and the hunters who are just as bad as its RE1 counterpart. Even Wesker returns for a short cameo with his new supernatural abilities. It was great seeing him return to set up the story for its sequel, even if he only appeared in cutscenes. But the newest addition to the roster of creatures in Code Veronica is the Bandersnatch, a small tyrant with a retractable right arm that can reach you even at the other side of the room. Disposing of these creatures can be a bit of a hassle, as they're one of the first bullet sponge common enemies in the franchise. But once you get the upgrade for the arrows or the grenade launcher, it'll be a lot easier, though getting a cheap hit from it is still possible. There's also the annoying moths which you'll encounter in the Antarctic area, whose attacks are being able to poison and impregnate you. These annoying creatures are only seen in one small hallway, but their sheer amount of numbers and being able to respawn each time you enter it makes them very deadly. You can try to run away from them, but there's only a small chance that you'll get away scratchless, forcing you to kill all of them. The problem is, there's only a limited amount of supplies, especially in Code Veronica, so good luck to you. There was even an instance where I couldn't get out of the hallway at all, since each time I tried running away, I just kept getting poisoned and impregnated before I could even take 2 steps, so I kept going back to the blue herbs. And of course, there's also the infamous Tyrant and the boss fight that takes place in the small plane. It is such a cheap and an almost impossible fight. After getting 3 hits, you're basically dead, and there's barely any place to run as the place is too small and the Tyrant is way too fast. And if you go too far, you could even get pushed off the plane, which could lead you to an instant game over. Before you could even take a step after attacking the Tyrant, he's already in his attack animation. It literally took me about 4 hours just to finish this one single boss fight. I didn't want to restart the entire campaign because the game is already long enough as it is.
What was wrong?
Oh, nothing. Just a giant cockroach that had to be stepped on.
There's a lot of impossible encounters in Code Veronica. No wonder half of the boss fights are skippable. And oh god, you have no idea how much I've replayed the Steve segment. Thank god there's now an autosave feature in the game. And not to mention how when you backtrack in some places, some of the enemies would even respawn, which could cause you to waste a lot of already limited supplies.
There was a friendly but naive king who wed a very nasty queen. The king was loved, but the queen was feared.
A lot of people in the community says that Code Veronica is the game that steered the franchise away from its horror roots and turned it into action. But I completely disagree. While almost every single cutscenes are over the top and have an explosion like RE3, when you've actually taken control, the game has a more slower pace and has a very gothic-ass atmosphere and locations. This game is a lot more atmospheric than the previous sequels that we've got. But what I think is the biggest flaw of Code Veronica is the mandatory character switching. You'll mostly be spending your time playing as Claire in the campaign. However, as mentioned earlier, you'll also get to take control of Chris. And when the story finally switches to him, you'll have the ability to use all of the items that have been stored in the item box when playing as Claire. But now this is the main issue. The game will not warn you whenever it switches perspective. So, you could have brought every single available weapon or healing item to one of them for some reason, and when it finally switches to the other character unannounced, you could possibly screw yourself over, as you don't have a single supply for the character, as you weren't prepared. And this is basically what happened to me on my first playthrough, and why I never even got to finish it. I transferred all of my weapons to Claire, thinking we would play as her, since the perspective switched to her, while the self-destruct announcement was playing, and it is after all her game. But then out of nowhere, it just changes to Chris, and the only weapon I had was the pistol. At that point, it was simply impossible. The thing is, I didn't even know that would happen. It's such an important feature in the game, yet it never gets any proper explanation. Anyone that's playing this for the first time could easily screw their own saves, even before they switch to Chris, by not leaving the items in the item box. Code Veronica is a great game, offering a grand journey and a throwback to the classics. But its punishing mechanics and boss encounters that border on impossible really makes it hard to enjoy the game. If Code Veronica ever gets a remake, then it would take more than a simple adaptation. There's a lot of here that needs a bit of changing.